Hi everyone, hope we're all good. Obviously Friday live. We've got quite a few things to cover off today and I don't want to make these things too long, so I'm going to crack straight on with it. The first one that I was asked about was needing to do something on dealing with the first week of sobriety, because there's a lot of people doing days 1 to 3 a lot. I think this is kind of a fairly common problem. So the point of the books and the point of Quit Lit generally and counselling, all the rest of it, where you're trying to get to is a point where you don't want to drink anymore, where you just have no interest in alcohol. Okay, that's like the Holy Grail of where you want to get to. Very few people manage to get there. Some do and just genuinely have no interest in alcohol whatsoever. But most people get part of the way there or some of the way there. But because there's so many, we're bombarded daily with all these images of laughing, happy drinkers and it being such a wonderful drug and etc., etc. So it's very, very hard to maintain all the time that 100% happy not to drink. And most of us at some point or another will look at alcohol and think, oh, it would be nice to have a drink in this situation or that situation. We get rid of them fairly quickly, but they are there. But my point is, you can't. Most people don't get to 100% being happy not drinking immediately. Okay, it takes a bit of time. The way you can get to being happy or happier not drinking is one, through reading and all the Quit Lit, but another way is experience. So actually going out on social occasions and not drinking, relaxing at the end of the day, weekends not drinking, and learning through experience that they are more fun and better without alcohol than they actually are with alcohol. Okay, so the point is here, you get as far as you can in teaching yourself that you don't want alcohol, but then there is a period where you do have to just grit your teeth and get on with it. Most people do have these thoughts on occasion, and you just need to get through it. So a lot of the time it is just a question of gritting your teeth and just resisting temptation sometimes to get that experience under your belt. I think also it's worthwhile saying, just to go back to the basic dynamics again, so remember that alcohol is a chemical depressant, it's a sedative, and when you take it, your brain seeks to counter the sedating effect of it by becoming overly sensitive so it can work while under the depressing effects of the alcohol, so that when the alcohol wears off, you're left overly sensitized and anxious. And that's what I talk about when I talk about alcohol withdrawal. It's a feeling of anxiety you get when the alcohol wears off. Okay, but the point is, it goes a bit. I refer to it as like anxiety, and in worst cases depression. But it's a bit more than that. It makes everything seem problematic. It makes everything feel like hard work. So in a way, when you quit drinking, you've got the two things at the same time, because you've got the withdrawal, which is when you feel least equipped to able to deal with difficult things, and you've got those first few days of not drinking, and it can be a difficult combination. Okay, so I'm not particularly one to advocate one day at a time, because I think life should be more than just limping through one day at a time. But if you need to do that, then do it. Now, a lot of the time, the worst of the withdrawal is over within about 5 days, and then it tails off even more up to about 3 weeks. So most people find they're significantly better off after about 5 days. Okay, and the vast majority of people are virtually through all of it by the time they get to about 3 weeks. So if you are struggling with these days 1, 2 and 3 all the time, what is sometimes worth doing is don't look long term. Just say to yourself, I'm going to have 5 days without drinking. Okay, and there's no great or easy way of getting through those 5 days. As I say, sometimes you do need to just grit your teeth and get on with it. But just try and make those 5 days, because the chances are at the end of those 5 days, as you're over the worst of the withdrawal, you start to feel a bit more resilient, a bit stronger, a bit more in control. you start to catch up on sleep a bit as well. So your mental resilience goes from like being rock bottom to starting to get back to where it ought to be. And that's what you really need when you're doing something supposedly difficult like quitting drinking. So you really do need to get those first few days under your belt. So if it helps, stop thinking about it long term and just tell yourself, I am going to go for 5 days without drinking. Not that you'll drink again after those 5 days, but you're just going to take those 5 days as a period and then see how you feel and sort of reevaluate then. Because most of the time you're over the worst of it, and then you're starting to get some traction and a bit of momentum with sobriety, and it actually gets a bit easier. Okay, another way of doing it is because a lot of the time the dynamic is you drink, you wake up in the middle of the night, can't sleep, you get out of bed in the morning feeling absolutely awful, and you say, I'm not going to drink again. And by the time lunchtime or early afternoon or evening comes, you drink. And it's just an ongoing, it's almost like it's your daily routine. You wake up vowing not to drink, and by the evening you're going to bed drunk again. And that's what you do every day. So committing to not drinking in the morning doesn't really have any strength to it, because you break that commitment every single day. So sometimes what it's worth doing is just breaking that cycle as well. So say to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to stop today. I'm going to drink for the next 3-4 days, whatever. And then you'll put a date in the diary for 3 or 4 days' time when you will make a serious and concerted effort. But the key as well is what you need to be doing in those few days lineup is to be really concentrating on the entire experience of drinking and comparing it to how you'd feel if you weren't drinking. So to start a 24-hour period, chances are you're waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning feeling anxious and miserable, because that's when the withdrawal's kicking in, completely unable to sleep even though you're really tired. So when you do that, think, well, what would I be doing now if I hadn't been drinking? Well, I'd be sleeping deeply and peacefully and restfully. Okay, when you get out of bed in the morning, exhausted and anxious and all the rest of it, just think to yourself, how would I feel if I hadn't been drinking for the last 3 weeks? You'd probably feel quite happy, you'd feel refreshed and ready to face the day. Keep those thoughts going throughout the entire day. But in particular, when you do finally sit down and have your first drink of the day, think about how it makes you feel and just be honest. Because the fact of the matter is, the great pleasure in drinking that alcoholic drink, that first drink of the day, and that wonderful relaxing feeling you get is not a true benefit. Because the relaxation is actually just anaesthetising the anxiety and tiredness that's been caused by all the previous drinking. So when you do sit down and have a drink and think how wonderful and relaxing it is, bear in mind that feeling of peace and tranquility is what we non-drinkers have all the time. We don't have to wait for a few hours every day and poison ourselves to get that feeling. So go through that process for those 3-4 days, whatever, and then on day one, that is your commitment. No matter what happens, you are not going to drink. And give yourself a period of maybe just 5 days when you're not going to do it, and then start to review where you are. Those first few days are going to be unpleasant. So to run through what will happen when you stop drinking. Okay, firstly, the alcohol has to leave your system. Okay. After that, you have that period of anxiety and depression, which is the overstimulation period, where your brain is still gauged to be working under the sedating effects of alcohol, so it's hypersensitive, and that's where you get the anxiety and depression. And you've got anything between 24 hours to maybe 4 days of that, depending on how severe it is. 4 days is the absolute outside for the chronic alcoholic, people drinking 2 or 3 bottles of spirits a day. Most people, it's over in about 24 hours. Okay, after that, you need a day or 2 just to catch up on sleep, and then generally you're fine. But if you are a regular drinker, okay, someone who drinks every day, there is another phase you need to go through. So when the alcohol wears off, your brain gets back to normal, but for however many years you've been drinking for, your brain has been used to being overstimulated all the time. Because the next dose of alcohol comes in before it's actually equalised from the previous dose. So you're constantly going through life on that overstimulation phase but just occasionally for a few hours every day anaesthetising it. And when you finally do get back to normal, it's the equivalent as if you've been drinking 7 or 8 cups of coffee every day and suddenly cut it out. So you can expect a period of anything up to 3 weeks where you feel really lethargic and tired. And again, it's just your brain chemistry equalising. And after that, a lot of people then have something where they literally just wake up and they finally got their brain chemistry back to normal. They've had a good night's sleep, and it's almost like a revelation. It's when you wake up and think, oh wow, I feel fantastic today. That's the thing you need to be looking forward to, and that's the thing you need to be aiming for when you're trying to get through those early days of sobriety. Okay, I hope that's useful. So the next things people have asked is about how about any facts or figures about those who really struggle with drink, drugs or food, who have underlying mental health problems. Okay, so there was something in the group about this the other day, and I think somebody posted something along the lines of, is it better to just be stoned all the time to deal with life generally, instead of drinking? Now, my take on it is, when we drink, we tend to drink to take the edge off of life and all the problems we have. Okay, so stopping drinking isn't just about quitting alcohol. It's also about developing new mechanisms to cope with life, because everybody's life has ups and downs. And when you're in the habit of reaching for a drink to deal with the problems, when you quit drinking, you need a new coping mechanism. Okay, so for me, for example, I use exercise. I like reading books and comics. I like watching TV, just things to relax. Some people meet friends, or obviously at the moment in lockdown do Zoom calls, or they do yoga or meditation. They join sober communities and book clubs. There's a whole world of things you can do out there. Okay, other people turn to weed and smoking too many cigarettes and caffeine and all the rest of it. Okay, it may be marginally better to do something like overeating or whatever to try and deal with those problems, but it's not really giving you a chance to live your best life ever. Okay, so you need to develop other mechanisms. Now, some people will have genuine mental health concerns. Okay, when you quit drinking, that is your opportunity to shine a light on those and deal with them properly. Okay, because when you're drinking, you're going through a constant pendulum of either anaesthetising things or being oversensitive to them. Now, when you have genuine mental health issues, our human understanding of these is very much in its infancy. They're very difficult to deal with, and they require a very close relationship between the patient and the medical professional as they try lots of different things. And a lot of it is, rather than exact answers, it's trial and error to see what works. It's not possible to go through that process when you're drinking, or indeed anaesthetising with any other drug. You need to clear yourself out completely and get back to normal brain chemistry, so that then you can shine a light on those problems. So my advice there would be, sort your drinking out first and then seek whatever medical advice you do need to get. And it's worth, if you do have an underlying issue, sorting it out properly by going to see a doctor. Someone else posted as well, and I think there's been a few of these, about lasting irreversible damage done by alcohol, and sort of going through these. I don't really know these. I mean, I read David Nutt's book recently on alcohol, which a lot of the information is in there. My limited understanding of it is, unless your liver is literally conking out or you've got cirrhosis, a lot of the damage is reversible. There's alcoholic brain damage, which isn't reversible or can be. But to be honest, it's not really my area of expertise. What I'm interested in and what I hope is useful to people is sort of explaining alcohol from an addiction perspective rather than the actual physical detriment it causes. So, as I say, if you are interested in that, it might be worth checking that book out by Professor David Nutt, because there's a lot of information in there. So the other one was hosting a get-together with alcohol. Should I provide alcohol? What do I do if I get bored, tired, and want drinkers to leave? Should I set ground rules? That's a really good one. I personally... So there's a few ways of dealing with it. If you do it earlier in the day, you're more likely to get away with serving teas and coffees and not having alcohol, which is the ideal. I personally don't like being around people drinking because I find them boring. I find when the alcohol starts to kick in, they repeat themselves, they stand too close, they think they're funny when they're not. People that I would otherwise get on well with, I start to find irritating when they've been drinking. And if you're hosting, you have a right to enjoy that social occasion. So I would try and shove it earlier in the day and just not have alcohol there. If it's in the evening, there will be an expectation. And I think for me, it depends how close you are with the people you're inviting. If you can possibly get away with it, I would say to them, I'm not drinking at the moment, I'm not having alcohol. And that would be the ideal way of doing it. If you do not know them particularly well, or maybe it's like a circular thing where each person has a chance of hosting, where maybe it's a bit more difficult to not serve alcohol, it might be worth then serving it. So personally, we have people around for social occasions and we always serve alcohol, but it might be worth either telling them beforehand a cut-off time, which I think you're more than entitled to do if you're dealing with if you're hosting it. But another way to do it is to just stop topping people's drinks up at a certain hour, and then ask if anyone wants tea or coffee. Because that's a fairly clear marker in the sand that you're done with the evening. You'd like people to start leaving. So I hope that's useful for that one. The next one's an interesting one. I'm struggling to understand the whole stimulant process, and it goes on. The brain will secrete the amount it gets even if you don't drink near as much. I wonder about this, even if it stays the same after years later, and if you've not drunk for a very long time and you decide to have one drink, the brain will still produce the same amount of stimulant. So the question there, but basically what it's saying is, so if you're used to drinking 2 bottles of wine every night, your brain is used to recalibrating for the sedating effects of alcohol in 2 bottles of wine. Okay, if you then suddenly think, 2 bottles is too much, I'll just have a glass, you have a glass, but your brain is still recalibrating for the equivalent in 2 bottles. So you almost go straight into the withdrawal phase because you're overly stimulated, because your brain's expecting more alcohol than you actually get. Now that's why moderation is so difficult, and also why with moderation, if you suddenly start to moderate, if you suddenly start to cut down on your alcohol intake, you often find you don't sleep at all. It's because you're overly stimulated from the off. Now, what the question is saying is, well, what if you stop drinking for a year or 5 years or 10 years? Can you then go back into it and start from scratch? Now, to my knowledge, there's been no tests on this at all. It's just not something that's dawned on the scientific community to look into. Okay, I suspect it differs with individuals as well. And I suspect there'd be a lot of moral problems around how you would go to gauge that, because it's fairly easy to gauge people's physiological reactions to alcohol by taking their pulse, because when they're overstimulated, the pulse rate goes up. But the problem is you would need an otherwise problematic stroke heavy drinker who's given up alcohol, and then you'd need to reintroduce it to them, i.e. giving them the drug that they were so desperate to get away from in the first place. So I think there'd be some serious issues with that. Don't forget as well, the addiction is just not the chemical and the physiological reaction. The true addiction to alcohol is when you associate that unpleasant feeling that kicks in when the alcohol wears off to having another drink. Now that can either be in the short term, so you're out for the evening, you have a drink and 20 minutes later it's worn off and that overstimulation, that anxiety is starting to kick in, so you start wanting another drink to counter that, right through to the following morning when you wake up feeling awful and you immediately want to drink to take the edge off it. Now that's learned behaviour, that's your body learning that when you feel that unpleasant anxious feeling, you need alcohol to get rid of it. Now the problem is that will never end. Okay, whether you stop drinking for a year or 5 years or 10 years or 50 years, whenever you subsequently take an alcoholic drink, it will wear off and you will start to feel that unpleasant anxiety feeling. and you will then want another alcoholic drink to get rid of it. So I think it is a very interesting question. There is no answer to it anyway, but even if there were, and even if you could say, right, 5 years is your cut-off, you can then return to normal drinking from a physiological perspective, you're never coming at it as if you'd never drunk in the first place, because what differentiates the heavy drinker from the new drinker is that when the new drinker experiences that anxious feeling, and they do experience it, they just don't associate taking another drink to get rid of it, whereas the long-term heavy drinker does, and that's really where the addiction kicks in. So as I say, it's a very interesting question, and it'd be very interesting to have an answer, but I think from the perspective of can I safely drink again, I think the answer is always going to be no. So the next one is, what do you do about the phenomenon of being sober for a time and then trying alcohol to prove to yourself you can get away with it or handle it, or to take away the anxiety of thinking you can never have it again? How do you defend against this trap? Well, I think it's partly, I've just covered that off anyway. I think that the interesting one there is take away the anxiety of thinking you can never have it again. That in a way goes back to taking one day at a time. One of the reasons taking one day at a time is such a powerful mechanism for so many people is because a lot of people struggle with the concept of I'm never going to drink again. But that all comes down to the fact that if you start this wanting to drink alcohol, of course you're going to struggle. And the only reason you would struggle with never drinking again is because a part of you still wants to drink alcohol. So it would seem to me if you are in that place, you probably have some work to do around just understanding fully what alcohol does. Are you still seeing it as this wonderful thing and social elixir and something that will take all your problems away? Or are you seeing the reality of it, that it's a particularly unpleasant drug that we just happen to drink in liquid form because that's the easiest way of making it? The only reason it's so prevalent in our society is not because it's wonderful or natural or necessary, it's because it's easy to make. A lot of drugs, they're very difficult to make, it's a very delicate chemical process, the actual raw ingredients you need are very hard to get hold of. Alcohol's not like that, you just need a load of rotting fruit or vegetable and you can make it. That's the only reason it's prevalent in our society. A few times I've heard people saying, alcohol's an important part of human development. It's not at all. It's just a drug we happen to take because it's easy to make. I struggle with the concept of it being necessary or important. People will say, but it's been around since however many thousands of years ago, but so has murder and rape and all the other horrible things we also live with. It doesn't mean just because they've been around forever we necessarily want to keep them. If there's a way we can get rid of it. The next one is around post-acute withdrawal syndrome. Now, the problem with it's known as PAWS, and the idea behind it is it's a withdrawal that kicks in after the initial period of withdrawal has gone. Now, the problem is its symptoms are incredibly vague, and things like insomnia and restlessness and mild depression and all the rest of it. It's really not pinned down. It's been given this sort of blanket term of PAWS. I didn't suffer from it, and I know a lot of people who didn't suffer from it. And so I can't say it doesn't exist, but what I will say is, if you think you're giving up something important and necessary and fun and your life is never going to be the same without it, I'm not surprised that there's a period where you go into sort of mild depression and kind of restlessness, because you've kind of got through that. It seems to coincide as well with the sort of pink cloud, because don't forget, when you quit drinking, when you're drinking, your life is fairly grim. You're tired, you're lethargic, your heart rate's through the roof, you don't sleep properly. And when you drink, it's wonderful because you start sleeping properly, you start feeling physically and mentally better, but then that becomes life. And it just becomes the norm. So a lot of the time we then start to forget how awful the drinking was, and we just start to assume that this is how life always was at this better level. And then we start to look back over it. And I think if you don't understand it fully and you start missing alcohol, then you probably do go through a period of restlessness and insomnia. So again, I hope that's useful. The next one is a few words on fear of missing out. I'm always picturing alcohol being involved in having a good time. So again, that comes back to fantasizing. So don't forget, when you're doing that, you are fantasizing about drinking, and it is a fantasy. Okay, if alcohol was necessary to have a good time, everyone would have to have it. I forget the population of the world. Is it something like 8 million? And only half the people drink regularly. Half the population of the planet don't drink, either for religious reasons or cost or whatever. Entire countries largely are alcohol free. Those people don't sit there miserable all day long. They don't not meet people, and they don't not enjoy socialising. They go out, they have a great time, they meet their friends, they laugh, they chat. Don't forget, when you have children, children go out and socialise and have an absolute whale of a time, and we all did when we were children. Okay, then you get to a period in your life when alcohol is involved in socialising, so we start drinking, and every time we socialise, we drink alcohol. And we start to forget how we can enjoy social occasions without alcohol. And after that, we can never get, well, seemingly we can't get back to that period of actually enjoying them. But don't forget, it's not a natural situation to be in. We're not supposed to be taking drugs to enjoy ourselves. When you are relaxed and happy and socialising, your brain releases endorphins, which make you feel good. Okay, that's what happens when you socialise. Now, we're all creatures of society, so usually when we're out socialising, there's a degree of nervousness. So you won't get that endorphin buzz until you relax into the social occasion a bit, and then the endorphin starts flowing. Now, some of us are more shy than others, and it takes longer to settle into a social occasion, but we all get there in the end, and we'll get that endorphin buzz. Now, because most of the time alcohol is served and it is a sedative, it will sedate those feelings of nervousness, so it will give you that endorphin high quicker. And that, a lot of the time, what people think is an alcohol high is actually an endorphin high, and all the alcohol has done is allowed them to access that endorphin high maybe 15 or 20 minutes earlier than they otherwise would have done. So again, just keep the reality in mind. You do not need alcohol to have a good time at all. And just, again, go back to what I was saying before. It's just the drug that makes you feel slightly dulled and stops you sleeping and then makes you feel anxious. Why on earth would you need that to enjoy yourself? So the next one was lack of support from my husband and continue being labelled a drunk, 2 weeks alcohol free. I think your answer's in the question there. You are probably only 2 weeks alcohol free, and don't detract from your achievement. 2 weeks is fantastic. You're over the worst of it. You're really starting to get some traction with your sobriety. From your perspective, what you've done is absolutely amazing, and you should be proud of it. But maybe from your husband's perspective, now I can't talk about you personally, but I can say from my perspective, I promised to stop drinking 100 times and failed. So when I finally did turn around and say, I've stopped drinking, I personally knew it was different that time and that it was going to continue forever. But my wife didn't know that because I told her 100 times I was going to do it. So it wasn't an immediate fix. Just because you know you have stopped and this time it's different, nobody else does. Now, as the days turn into weeks and the weeks turn into months and the months turn into years, your husband will realise that this time it is different, and you will start to rebuild whatever damage has been done to that relationship. But it does take time. The next one was getting through cravings. Now, I've spoken about cravings quite a few times, so I'm not going to go over it again now. If you are interested, I think have a look at some of the earlier videos. But essentially, it goes back to what I was talking about before, which is keeping reality in mind. Okay, so don't fantasize, keep the reality of drinking in mind. The one thing I do want to talk about, because this is a good one, the misery of moderation. I drink 1 to 2 nights a week, but think about it constantly. And I think this is really the problem with moderation. It's always going to be difficult because of the physiological reasons, okay? Because when one drink wears off, you have a physical withdrawal and want another one, okay? So you are always going to want to keep drinking, okay? For that reason, moderation is going to be extremely difficult. But if you can manage it, what people end up doing is just obsessing with alcohol all the time, because they're constantly thinking about, can I drink now? Should I drink? Do I have to wait for my next drink? If I'm having a drink, I've finished it. Should I wait for the next one? you become just obsessed with alcohol as you ever were when you were drinking, because you're just thinking about it all the time. And yes, you might not have the chronic hangovers, you might not have the intoxication, but you're losing as much of your life to alcohol as if you were drinking more heavily, because you're constantly thinking about it. And this is why there's a huge difference in quality of life between a small number of drinks. Sorry about that. So there's a huge disparity in quality of life between a couple of drinks and just not drinking. If you have even 1 or 2 drinks 1 or 2 times a week, that alcohol is going to disturb your sleep and leave you feeling tired the next day. It's going to leave you feeling anxious. It's going to then have you obsessing about alcohol all the time, because you're constantly thinking, can I have another drink? Can I drink on this occasion? Can I drink on that occasion? Whereas if you just make a decision, I'm not drinking, I'm never drinking again, there's nothing to think about. I think about drinking 70% of my waking hour, but the key is I never think about actually taking an alcoholic drink, because I know I'm never going to. So I waste 0 time agonising over whether to have a drink or not. I sleep well most, or if not every night, and I wake up feeling fairly good. And that's what you're missing out on by drinking even once or twice a week. And I think it's time, really, you did yourself a favour and just quit. If you're still in any doubts, just give yourself a period of 1, 3 weeks, a month, whatever you can manage, and just see how much better your quality of life is. Sorry, it's quite a long one this week, so there's quite a few questions. We've only got 3 left. When to stop trying to help somebody and hope they go to rehab? When does trying to help somebody become dangerous because they are too far gone? I think all you can really do is just keep trying to help people. Some people do need to go to rehab, and some people need a chemical intervention, a medical professional intervention. All you can do is just keep trying to help people, and I'm not sure you could ever necessarily stop trying to help them, to be honest. I know if it was me, I would always be trying to help someone. Sometimes it may feel hopeless, but all you can do is just keep trying, I guess. The next one is the process of how long does it take for our brains to rewire for cravings or associating the drink with the good times. I have a good time without drink, but when thoughts associating to good times come to mind, the drink is the first thing I will think about until I work on removing the thoughts from my head. So people often use the phrase like rewiring the brain like it's something that just sort of naturally happens. The physiological side will dissipate and disappear and you will get back to normal. But rewiring, I think you've answered your own question there, because you say it remains until you think about removing the thoughts from your head. And I think that's what you need to do. If you quit drinking and think you're giving up something wonderful and you're miserable without it, that's not probably going to change after 5 years or 10 years or 40 years. At some point, you're going to have to take the bull by the horns and really think about what it is you actually miss about it, and hopefully come to the conclusion there's absolutely nothing. But that's what you need to do. Whenever a thought of having an alcoholic drink enters your head, you need to look at the reality of it, because usually there's a huge degree of fantasy involved in these things. So we very rarely think, oh, I'd love to just sit in front of the telly half comatose and drink a warm glass of wine, or spill it over myself because I'm falling asleep, which is the reality of it. We usually think about some ridiculous situation that we've never experienced anyway, like being on a fabulous holiday and having a nice cold drink, or it's Christmas and there's mulled wine and a roaring fire and all these ridiculous situations that don't exist anyway. So the point is, stick to the reality of it, and also take the situation out of the alcohol. These situations are enjoyable because you're on holiday, or because it's Christmas and you're in a nice warm environment, or whatever it is. It's not enjoyable because you've got a small amount of poison that's going to anaesthetise you slightly and then ruin your sleep. So take the alcohol out of the situation. Don't be suckered into the whole thing. If alcohol is enjoyable in and of its own, you'd be happy sitting in a dark room drinking neat alcohol. Of course that wouldn't be enjoyable. It's the situation we're in that we associate with drinking that's the problem. Actually, the last one anyway is how to manage day one, which I think I've already dealt with. So this particular one is 6 p.m. every day. The cries in my head for a drink start. So as I say, set yourself a period. Don't forget as well, I covered it in possibly Alcohol Explained too, but the tipping point. So your tipping point is 6 p.m. So make a plan for 6 p.m. I think I posted something similar to this in the group the other day as well. When you quit drinking, your life does change. So my weekends, what I used to do is usually start drinking around lunchtime on a Friday, drink right through the evening. I'd then be in a complete state most of Saturday, so I'd just be sitting around all morning, and then at some point I'd start drinking, and then I'd spend the rest of the day drinking, and then ditto on Sunday. Okay, so then if you stop drinking, you go into a weekend, you're probably going to find it a bit weird if you're not drinking, because you're going to be going to bed at a reasonable hour and waking up fresh. So if you've got nothing planned, you're going to be sitting around staring at the four walls. So make a plan for the weekend. You're not going to be comatose on the Friday night, so you can maybe plan a nice meal or a film or something. You're going to be up bright and early on the Saturday, so go for a walk, meet some friends, read whatever it is. Plan nice things to do in the time you have been gifted back that you'd normally be sat around comatose or feeling awful. And maybe do that for the evening as well. Don't just, if usually you sit in front of the TV drinking wine all evening, do something else or plan something else. Plan a nice meal or anything. But also start concentrating on just those few hours. So if it's usually 6 o'clock you start drinking, why don't you just say, right, I'm just not going to drink for an hour? And again, I'm not a big one for advocating you live your life one day at a time, but if that gets you through those early days, then that's what you need to do. Just try and get through those first few days. And as I say, when you start to get those first few days under your belt, your mental resilience will start to come back. You'll start sleeping better, which will again clarify your mind a lot. And you'll feel much more able to deal with these things. I'll probably call it a day now. It's gone on a bit longer than I normally do, but I hope that was useful for everyone. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll probably stick something on to do next week. Cheers, bye.